I was afraid that you were going to say, give me a warm welcome, and it's certainly far more than warm today, so thank you for coming to the session. Like some of the other items this morning, I am going to incorporate some technology into our discussion this afternoon, so if you could keep your mobile phones available, I'm going to have you go to a website. It won't be the specific app for the SHRM conference, but it will be a website, and I'll tell you what that is here in just a couple of moments. Okay, so organizational agility. And I was thinking back even to some of the things that were brought up in earlier sessions this morning, and while some of them dealt with machine learning and digitization, I think a theme of all that is agility. And so let me just describe briefly our company. It's not a promotion about the company, but it's more of even just where do we get this information and how am I able to share it with you. Our company name is called ProSci. So if you think of the words professional and science, you put them together, that's how you come up with ProSci. But we do get some interesting derivations, ProSci, 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 many different ways, so I'll answer to any of them. We really specialize in research in the field of change management. Now, since all of you are in the human resources area, I'm sure that you realize that change management is not about version control in our software. It is about how do people respond when changes come their way. So we're going to talk through some of the research that we've learned and how does it relate to these concepts of agility. We've been doing research in this area of change management for over 20 years now and have a very extensive database. So from an agenda perspective, here's what I propose we go through. First, what is the compelling case for agility? We'll talk through a definition, because without a definition, how do we know whether we are or are not in an agile mode? So we'll talk through a definition of agility, and then finally, what are the characteristics or the attributes of organizations that are demonstrating it? Now, if I was speaking to a software group, I would say, first of all, let me tell you what we're not talking about today. I'm sure most of you are aware of this. There's two different ways of using Agile. There's little a, it's an embedded characteristic, or Agile. It's something about us, versus Agile, the way of working, and very common in software development, and indeed many organizations are adopting Agile projects as their standard way of work. So just to clarify a little bit more detail, Agile, what we're talking about today, is a trait where Agile work is a method. A, in our case, is something we are versus something we do. Agility should be practiced by everybody. Agile, in the big A sense, is typically by project teams, software engineers, and so on. So you get the perspective of this is what we're going to be discussing this afternoon. It's little a. Now, I would like each of you to pull up your mobile phone devices. And if you could help me, it makes this so much more interesting. You could go to a website, so pull up your Safari browser or your Chrome or whatever you're using, and please go to the website. It's a little bit hard to read up there. It's pollev.com/ADKAR. pollev.com/ADKAR. And the question is, and you'll see it on the website, in your organization, where would you put yourself? Do you talk a lot about agility but do nothing? Is it not even a big part of your organizational DNA and what's important? Do you have some specific things that your organization is doing to enable agility? So is it coming up on your phones? The polling software? pollev.com/ADKAR. pollev.com/ADKAR should be the website. Is that working? Okay, so you can just touch on the quadrant that you think most reflects where your organization is. So if you, well, what happened to the text? So how you look at this is if you talk a lot about agility in your organizations, you're going to be on the upper half versus agility is not a part of what's being discussed. If within your organization you're doing nothing for agility, you would be down here. Or if you have some specific initiatives and activities, please put your finger on the dot towards the right. Now we're starting to get some polling. Don't you love technology? It's supposed to enable us, or sometimes it just gets in the way. So what I can see from this is several of you, more than half, you hear the word agility in your workplace fairly frequently. Some of you are doing some specific things about it. Those would be in the upper right quadrant, to use a Gartner term. But many of you are saying, yeah, we talk about it a lot, but I'm not sure that we really are doing much. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I will share this with everybody afterwards, and you can use it as a point of reference for your organization. So, let's talk about what is the compelling case for agility. I like to use something like this to kind of think of what is it like every morning when I get up, and on my way to work, there's a dizzying amount of things that we could be doing, or that I could be doing. How is it that we're going to decide what's the most important? Kind of like the speaker that we had shortly before lunch, when he was talking about things that differentiate us versus the things that we just have to be good at. Wow, this is not working. Forget the technology sometimes. Sorry about that. One of the things that we frequently see in our world today, and you all know this, you're a part of it, is the changes we incorporate that occur are often much bigger than they were 10, 20 years ago. We know they're faster. We know that in many cases they're more complex, such as the incorporation of digitization into our workplace and machine learning and all those things have a profound impact on the way we work. And compared to the business, when I think of where my father was at, a lot of the initiatives that they did were pretty siloed. They were in the finance group, they were in manufacturing or logistics, but now we all know when we put in a CRM system or a learning system or ERP, it's very cross-functional. The sources of change that we have in our businesses really come from many different sources. So let me just highlight a few of those that we've learned from our research. As has been discussed earlier, a source of change can be something we want to do strategically, related to internal performance, continuous improvement, a lean initiative, going through Six Sigma. Those are things that we try to do ourselves. They can be external. Many times we are in more of a reactionary mode, whether it's based on regulation, competitive threats, new technology. And one of the other speakers this morning was saying, maybe in the past, business drove IT decisions, and he was saying now, many times IT technology drives our business decisions and actions. That would be something that externally forces us to change. Sometimes they're more goal-oriented, and sometimes you can see other external factors. So all of this is just said to reinforce the concept of we are undergoing continuous change in our organization. One of the research findings that we learn, this has really been the case for the last 4 or 5 years, is more and more organizations, actually I should say more and more people in the organizations are saying the level of which I can adapt to new changes is too much. Sometimes we call it change saturation. And yet we know that the pace of change is continuing to go faster and faster and more. So how are we going to deal with that? We know there's more information, more connected. Has any of you seen the picture on the lower left there before? That is a description of people logging into Facebook at a point in time. And then, with over 1 billion logins a day, and of course they're going through their own challenges and so on, but it still is a representation of how connected we are across the globe. Anybody ever familiar with the term VUCA that's used nowadays? I see a few of you. I'm not sure if we're in more of a volatile world than we ever were in the past. And there certainly is uncertainty, but I'd argue that's probably already or always been the case. But it certainly is complex, the world that we live in. And very seldom is it limited to Hyderabad or Denver, Colorado, where I came from. It is often very complex and very big. So the compelling case for agility. When I was describing the theme of our session here this afternoon, I was referencing a few different studies, and that is leader after leader is saying agility is important. Most of you said you hear that word thrown out a lot in your organizations. Here's a couple of references. So 76% of CEOs, according to a PwC survey, said their ability to adapt to change is going to be a key source of competitive advantage. A McKinsey article said that 9 out of 10 executives said that organizational agility is key or is crucial to their business success. A couple more. In our own study, and I made reference to this earlier, 78% of the people in our research study recently, which is just published here a couple months ago, said that they are at the point of change saturation. They're not able to effectively adopt and utilize all of those things that are put in front of them. And that's really, when I think of change management, what it is. It's effective adoption, using it or not using it, and then effectively utilization. That's what change management is. Project Management Institute goes on to say that greater organizational ability equals better performance equals improved competitive advantage. So I hope with all of that, kind of the background of the world we live in, the sponsors, or the comments from the executives that lead our organizations, our own research, all says that we need to be agile if we're going to be effective in the 21st century. Well, what is agile? It's interesting. Many times I get a chance to work with clients across the globe, and they'll say, come help us change our values. How can I do that, right? They'll say, help me to be more agile. They'll say, help us be more transformational. Help us be more innovative. And yet, when I go into their rooms and I ask 10, 12 different managers, what does that mean to you? I'll typically get 10 or 12 very different answers. And so what I'm going to do is propose a potential way of describing agility. You may not want to use the exact term in the way that I define it, but let me put it out there as food for thought. What do we tend to do today when we want to learn something? We go to our friend Mr. Google. And I often like to look at the image section rather than just the results that come up if you type in a word and it shows you a bunch of websites. Anyone have a good idea what will come up if you type the word agility or agile? It's actually a picture of my dog. Not literally my dog, but the type of dog that I have. Any of you ever seen dog agility events where they go around these wickets like this and over boxes and into tubes and so on? I think that's a pretty good pictorialization of what agility is. Okay, that probably doesn't help us in our organization though. Here's a couple different definitions. Let's start with what are others saying before we say what Mark says. Dictionary says it's the power of moving quickly and easily. That seems to work for me. McKinsey said organizational agility, getting a little more specific, the capacity to identify and capture opportunities more quickly than rivals. Comes back to that competitive comment that came from the other PwC survey. PwC said agility is being able to take advantage of change, whether planned or unexpected. I can resonate with that. We were talking earlier about sources of change can be external to our organization, whether it's a technology change, a regulatory change, a new threat from a competitor. Being able to adapt to those without losing your way, I think is a pretty good definition of agility. The Economist says the ability to transform information into insight in response to market improvements. Goes on to say, Hosapel and Lee, it's the result of integrating alertness to changes with a capability to use resources in responding to such changes. So I think we can start to see some patterns of what others are saying a definition of agility could be. Daryl Connor, who's one of the grandfathers, if you will, of this discipline of change management, said a nimble organization is one that has a sustained, a continuous ability to quickly and effectively respond to the demands of change. One more. Accenture says it's an always present ability. So when we start to look at a definition of agility, let me combine these and come up with one and see what you think. I'll skip a couple of those. Here's what I've learned from the research, or from the readings, if you will. Some of the key sentences that I heard, it's always present. It isn't something you turn on and off. It is doing it better than your competition. It is anticipating. There you get into that proactiveness. It's not only responsiveness,
planned and the unplanned again, and then finally doing it in a way that doesn't throw us off our seat, doesn't take us out of the game, so to speak. So if you could, pull out your mobile phone again. I'd like to see what you think. Here's some of the characteristics, and it's not showing up perfectly on the screen. It should show up in the app there. Which of these characteristics of the definition resonate the most with you? I'm going to have to walk over here to the secret booth because I can see the percentages that way. It's not showing right? Wow. pollev.com, pollev.com/ADKAR. Is it not working? Now we're getting the numbers. It's still not displaying perfectly here. So what I see, for those of you that are able to make the technology work, that the most common ones is this kind of notion of speed, of quickness, of doing something rapidly seems to resonate with you all. Secondly is staying attuned to coming changes. So not only that reactionary component, but the ability to do it quickly. About 20% of you are saying that ever-present, always ability, and then the unplanned and planned component seems to be accelerating as well. I'm going to have to apply some change management, I think, to my software here. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Let me go on and describe what are the attributes of Agile organizations and how can we intentionally try to accomplish that. So once again, I'll review some other sources, not just my own, to help put it to a little bit of credence here. So PMI, the Project Management Institute, which probably many of you use in your organizations, has this as one of the key components for agility. It's rigorous change management to better adapt to shifting market conditions. PwC focuses on managing change through people. So in other words, in their own definition of agility, they're talking about the people of your organizations and have you describe the key characteristics, the core capabilities that you want in every person across the group. You're probably not going to list change management. You're probably not going to list agility. Maybe we should. Xplane, which is a software visualization company, highlights all of these things as it relates to agile characteristics, things like clarity, inspiration, visualization, co-creation, action, and you can read them. Daryl Connor, once again, one of the leaders or founders of the discipline of change management, describes all of these as attributes of agile organizations. Finally, I4CP talks about managing change as a core competency at the enterprise level. So why do I share all these? I shared them to show these are things that are leading in the marketplace nowadays that are becoming discussions of topic, not just within a small group of HR professionals or project management professionals, but with leaders across the organization. So how can I summarize those into something that maybe we can look at together and take some action on? So let me summarize those again. We anticipate and plan for change. We are fast at decision making. We proactively prioritize our portfolio. Remember that statistics that I shared earlier that said 78% of our research participants said, we can't take change anymore. We are at a saturation point. Well, one of the ways that you reduce that is to prioritize your projects so that not as many hit them at the same time. Or we at least prioritize the rollout so that we're not hitting manufacturing 5 times at once, or finance, or whatever the situation may be. We effectively initiate change efforts. So what this would mean is when we're beginning a new project, we are intentionally planning for how people adopt and utilize that new way of working. And now we're building our resourcing plans, our communication plans, our adoption plans, our coaching plans with that in mind. We have enhanced risk management practices, capital and strategy, human capital and strategy initiatives focused on agility. Some of the things we were talking about, I believe it was right before lunch, was the gentleman from Indeed was talking about how do we intentionally or unintentionally build digitization, machine learning, and so on into our recruiting efforts. Well, a question that I'd like to ask is if we're so interested in talking about agility, are we looking for that in the attributes in the way we're doing our recruiting, our onboarding, and our development? We rapidly deploy new capabilities, encouraging cross-functional collaboration, and the reduction of silos. So when I'm looking through that literature that I shared with you, these are some patterns and some themes that I've accumulated to say, this is a definition of agility in the organization. So recently, I was working with a couple of organizations, and we did some polling, if you will, not really polling, but some research into how effectively are they doing each of those capabilities. And you can see from this spider type diagram, not too many of them were actually a strength. These two organizations, and I summarized the results, they had pretty good risk management practices. That was a strength. But you can see that for many of these characteristics, they're describing them pretty weak. It's not something that they're good at. So let me hone in on one of them. We have an embedded change management capability in our organization, and how do we start building that with the intention that it supports our agility efforts? For those of you who have been, can I ask, I won't do an electronic poll this time, it's not working so well right now. How many of you have a change management approach in your organization, or at least a person or two that kind of focuses on change management? Anybody in here? A few? Okay. Well, historically, over the last 8, 10, 12 years, when we think of change management, we think of applying it in the context of a project. We want people to use our new ERP system much more effectively. We don't want them to keep the spreadsheets. And so we tend to think of it in terms of a project delivery approach, and that is good. But if we're going to do this at an agility level, cross-organization, it's more like building the city of Hyderabad. I mean, it needs to be everywhere in the organization, applied to everything we're doing. So it's with that context that I'm going to describe how we could possibly get there. Enterprise change management capability. So here's my definition. When great change management, meaning planning on how people will adopt and utilize new things, when that becomes the standard way of working, not the exception. That's starting point of enterprise change management. It's built into the fabric, the DNA, the culture of our organization. That's another one of those interesting ones that clients will come to me and say, help us change our culture. Well, what about your culture do you want to change? You need to be specific. We want to be more rapid at decision making. We want to have people with standard ways of working. Whatever that may be, that becomes the culture. So if we have good change management, that can be an attribute of our culture. Like most things, whether it's a lean initiative or something like Six Sigma, it's not an on and off switch. You can make progress day by day, month by month, and it's a journey of becoming more agile. I wish I could just hand out a bunch of pills and everybody in this room would suddenly be more agile. It's not quite that easy. So how do we start to do it? We have to start by building those competencies at different levels in the organization, because different levels have to apply change management in a different context. I'll describe what I mean by that. For those of you that have gone to change management training, what you'll learn and what you do a deep dive on actually is to say, when we lead projects, we need our sponsors to do 3 very specific things. We need them to be active and visible, we need them to build coalitions, and we need them to communicate directly with those people who are being involved. So we need to teach our executives how to do that in the context of change management. That's the characteristics that we need to develop in them. If we're going to have, if we're going to have change management as a core capability, we probably need some people who specialize in it. Just like we need project managers, just like we need learning and development, just like we need finance people, and so on. We have to build it into the standard way that we plan, resource, and execute our projects. Too many times when I go to a client, they'll say, yeah, but we've got a training plan. Isn't that what change management is? That is one piece. I'd say it's 1 out of 5 pieces of change management, but we need to build this into our standard way of planning for projects, resourcing projects, managing projects, and determining their success. We need to help people managers be leaders of change. Once again, for those that have gone into more in-depth change management training, you'll probably learn that there's some specific roles that a manager has to do when we're deploying change. We call it a coaching framework, not in a formal sense like a life coach or something like that, but coaching the employee through the change by being a coach, a liaison, a communicator, a resistance manager, and I forgot the last word I was going to use. Communicator. Communication, sorry about that. But anyway, there are specific skills that a manager needs to have in the context of enterprise change, and people, those frontline staff, whether you're an engineer, call center person, in finance, whatever it is, each of us need to know how to plan for change as it's going to impact us, and what's our responsibility, what should we expect from the organization. So I mentioned we need to build this into our standard way of working. Not only do we have to have those characteristics in the organization, but it needs to become the standards of how we plan for and execute work. So I just described here very briefly, each of us, I'm sure, probably has a standard project management approach. It can be waterfall, sequential like this. It can be agile with scrum teams and all those kinds of good things. The point is, what we want to do is we want to align the ability of people to work with that new solution at the time of go live. Not 2 months later, not 6 months later, but we want to plan our activities so that we are prepared for it, which means our change management has to start long before we're actually deploying it to that group of people. So how do you begin? Now, we've created our own assessment model. And for those of you that are familiar with software engineering, there's the Capability Maturity Model Index, or integrated CMMI. We put together a model that helps organizations understand where are we today if we want to be good at agility because of change management. So I'll just show you the basics of the framework. Maybe you can think about your own organizations and to say, how well do we actually apply change management today? Is it something we have never done? Nobody actually applies it. Maybe we applied on an isolated project because there's someone who's a real champion who really believes in it. Maybe we're starting to do it a little bit more routinely, or does it move all the way up to the level 4 or 5 where it's an organizational standard, and like other approaches, we're continually looking at ways to improve it, enhance it, measure the success, etc. Our own research has shown that organizations that do very well at change management get far better results from their projects. And what I mean by that is, so for example, if putting in a new CRM system was one of the things that your organization was doing, I'm quite certain that when they took it for approval, whoever they is, they not only said it's going to cost us this much money, but we expect some business results. It's reduced cost, it's improved revenue, it's reduction of employee turnover, it's improved customer SAT scores. Whatever the business result is, I'm pretty sure that was part of the plan. Well, what the research has shown is those organizations with very good change management capabilities much more frequently achieve those business objectives. And so it's not just a new item to add into the cost structure, it's actually more of a benefit realization approach. So I'm going to say that enterprise change management capability is an essential enabler of agility. It can help reduce saturation and costs. It supports the strategies that our executives say are so important. It can become a competitive advantage and multiplies the overall benefit of doing change management on a more ad hoc or one-by-one basis. So if this is something that resonates with you, and you'd like to take it back to your organization and begin with the first step or two, I would say the first thing to do is understand your definition. As I was starting at the beginning of our conversation here today, you can describe agility many different ways, and I've given you some things you can look at, but you have to have a common definition in your organization before you can begin. Otherwise, you never know if you're going to achieve it, and you're going to have many different people trying to take it in different ways. Secondly, what problem are we actually trying to solve? Is it a reduction of stress on the employees? Is it a way to get ahead of our competition? What is the problem that we're actually trying to solve so that we can measure whether or not we're achieving that? And then finally, you put both of these into that common definition, that common way of speaking, so that everybody knows what you mean the next time people are walking around the halls in the office saying we need to be more agile or demonstrate agility. I won't force you to do this in our session here today, but I encourage you, to take a few minutes, write down what would your elevator pitch, your short statement of why you'd want your organization to become more agile, and then share it with those that you work with and see if it's something that others would agree with you on. So, in about 25 or 30 minutes this afternoon, taking you through what I hope is a compelling case for agility in the organization. Come up with some definitions that we can start to apply and see which portions of that work the best for you. And then we've learned that the attributes of an agile organization, there was a pie chart that had 10 different areas. I focused only in on one of them, and that was developing change management capability as a core competency in the organization. So with that, let me go ahead and close the presentation portion of this, and I think we're going to be open for Q&A for a few minutes, correct? Yep. So, any questions, comments on the things that I was going through very rapid fire this afternoon? Yep.
So how process solutions help us in bringing more agility into organizations, and how it helps its clients to get more agile?
So, well, let me do this. Here was the definition of agility. Our focus area is really in a few of these, not all of them. So it's in the area of effectively initiating change efforts, helping organizations effectively prioritize which ones are going to be the most important, and then having this change management capability. So I was describing that in the organization, there's expectations of what an executive needs to do and what a manager needs to do and how our project teams. We specifically accomplish that through a combination of providing some tools, some methods to do work, and some training to help build that capability. So that's the way we take it in those 3 specific areas to help clients achieve that. Answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Others? Everybody had too much biryani. One of my favorite Indian dishes, by the way. Actually, I was in Saudi Arabia a couple weeks ago, and they had the audacity to claim that that's their dish rather than an Indian dish. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. Yes?
Yeah, I think my question was related to, in terms of building the change management capability, if you have to engage with the top leaders, maybe the sponsors or the senior leadership. I don't know. In the context of organizations, who takes the ownership? Is it the HR? Is it
Good question.
The CXOs, or
Good question.
how do you start?
Can I give you a consultant answer and say it depends? Now, that is the reality, and I'm not trying to just be silly or smart. But I have learned, because we've done this with literally hundreds of organizations, it depends on how your organization is structured. Here's what I mean. Some organizations, let's say, are very, very IT-centric in the way that they do projects. That kind of rules the roost, so to speak. And so in those cases, I've often seen it begin and actually stay with the IT organization, okay? Let's take your manufacturing organization. A manufacturing organization may be much more project-oriented when it comes to product development or product enhancements, and therefore their project management office, their PMO, is probably not in IT, and so putting that change management capability in, along with your PMO is also another common way. I was recently at a bank in Australia, and their CEO said, this stuff is really, really important to me. I want our change management lead to report directly to me. So I've seen it in the context of like a strategy office, part of the PMO, sometimes within HR or IT, and I don't mean to say it depends because I can't answer it, but I don't think there's one answer today. It really depends on where in your organization is going to be the most effective.
So once the change management initiatives are taken by
Yeah.
Prosi or
Yeah.
at the client space or any other company for that matter of fact, so do we have a stoppage point of change also? Okay, now we have had enough change in the organization, now we want to focus on these fixed points and deliver results out of this, or we keep on changing and we don't reach anywhere, as the fear of any client would be to undergo a change management project.
So let me just confirm my understanding. You're not saying the organization stops changing.
No.
You're saying we reach a certain capability.
We'll have to fix at some point, okay, we are now going to fix this, at least for 6 months we are going to follow, 1 year we are going to follow these set of rules,
Right.
or whatever we have decided mutually,
Yeah.
and then go on for further change.
So yes, I was describing earlier and I showed a picture of going up the mountain. It's a journey. We've worked with organizations and I've seen, if I go back to that 5-level model, not everybody needs to be at a 5. Many will shoot to say, I want to be at a level 3 or level 4. That seems about right for our organization. I would say typically I've seen that take somewhere between 18 months and 3 years to get there. At that point, it does become more commonplace in the way you onboard people, in the way you bring in new project managers, in the way that you help leaders assume new roles. And so I would describe it as more of just sustainment at that point. But it can typically be a 1, 2, 3-year journey to get to that level that you're after.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
HR as a risk function, normally, in most of the time, we have been seen as showstopper for the agility journey. So do you have any good example that to balance the risk governance and being agile?
You mean from a human resource perspective or the?
In general, because I noticed that enhanced risk management is also one of the key attributes.
So can you repeat your question? Now I confused myself. I'm sorry.
Because I'm always in a dilemma that how can I play a risk steward role at the same time also enable business to be more agile.
Yeah, it was interesting this morning, and I'll refer to the gentleman from what was the benefits realization. Anyway, he was saying what cannot exist together is complexity and agility. That was one of the things in the session shortly before lunch, and I'll agree with that. What I'm going to refer to, though, is when we do research in this area of change management, we also look at those cultural dynamics. And I don't mean culture of India versus China versus Germany. What I mean, the culture of some organizations has some unique characteristics. Let's say you're an energy provider. You're probably going to be pretty risk-averse in the culture of your organization. You can't afford to have a meltdown in the plant and not provide electricity, to use an extreme example. Other places like in retail, clothing, and that type of thing, they have to turn through product development at a very, very rapid pace. They probably encourage innovation and those kinds of activities much more than in other places. Where I'm going with that is to say when we apply change management, we have to understand the context of our organization. Do we encourage people to take risks, or do we stifle people from taking risks? Do we encourage people to speak out because we have a kind of an open door policy, or are we very hierarchical in our communication approach? Each of those have to be applied or considered when we're building that change management competency because it's going to impact how we do some of the deployment. So, did I kind of answer your question at least? A little? Yeah.
Hi, I have a question here, right here,
Okay.
over here. Hi.
Okay.
As part of your certification program is a succession planning strategy and modeling a vital element, or how's that actually comes in place in all the mix?
I probably can't answer that in 30 seconds, but you do start to build a group of people with that capability, and then typically some kind of a change agent network around them that pulls in human resource business partners and communications and so on. So that's the short answer to your question, and I'm being told I have to leave. I could stay up here all day.
I can connect with you later on that.
That'd
Yeah.
be super.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your time this afternoon.